My name is Amber Wilson, 32, and until last month, I thought I knew what family meant. After years of grueling work, I finally owned my dream. A stunning penthouse overlooking Manhattan. Then came the dinner that changed everything. My parents and sister Rebecca invited me over, only to ambush me with legal documents. As my father slid the transfer papers across the table, my sister smirked. "You always had everything handed to you," she said. The irony burned as they demanded I hand over the penthouse I'd spent 10 years earning. Before I dive into this nightmare, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button and like if you've ever dealt with entitled family members. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how a complete stranger ended up saving me from losing everything I'd worked for. Growing up in suburban New Jersey, our middle-class family looked normal from the outside. My parents, Diana and Richard Wilson, worked steady jobs. Dad in insurance, Mom as a school administrator. We lived in a modest 4-bedroom house with a small backyard. Nothing fancy but comfortable enough. But inside those walls, the family dynamic was anything but balanced. From my earliest memories, it was clear who the favorite child was. My sister Rebecca, 2 years younger, somehow commanded the spotlight in every situation. When I brought home straight A's, my parents would nod with minimal acknowledgement. "That's what we expect from you, Amber," Dad would say, barely looking up from his newspaper. But when Rebecca managed to scrape together B's and C's, it was cause for celebration. "She tries so hard," Mom would gush, taking her for ice cream or buying her a new outfit. I started working at 14, babysitting for neighbors, and then getting a job at the local grocery store by 16. I saved every penny, watching my bank account grow dollar by dollar. Meanwhile, Rebecca cycled through allowance increases and emergency cash infusions whenever she drained her account on clothes or parties. "Your sister is more social than you," Mom would explain when I questioned the double standard. "She needs to maintain appearances." College followed the same pattern. I worked part-time through school, qualifying for scholarships and taking out minimal loans to attend State University for business. Rebecca went to a private college, dropped out after 2 years, and my parents simply absorbed the wasted tuition without a word of criticism. After graduation, I moved to the city with 3 roommates in a cramped apartment in Queens. Those early years were brutal, working 60-hour weeks at an entry-level position in a real estate investment firm while moonlighting as a bartender on weekends. My parents visited once, complained about the neighborhood being sketchy, and never came back. "Real estate is such a risky business," Dad commented when I explained my career path. "You should look into something stable, like teaching." By 27, after years of living on ramen noodles and declining social invitations to save money, I had enough for a down payment on my first property, a rundown 1-bedroom in Brooklyn that I renovated myself on weekends. I flipped it for a modest profit, then another, building my portfolio property by property. When I finally purchased my penthouse last year, a stunning 3-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a terrace overlooking Central Park, it represented everything I'd worked for. Hardwood floors throughout, a chef's kitchen with marble countertops, a soaking tub in the master bath where I could watch the city lights. It was my sanctuary, my reward for years of sacrifice. Rebecca's path took a different direction. She bounced between jobs, retail, administrative work, brief stints at startups, never staying anywhere longer than 8 months. Her romantic life followed a similar pattern. A string of boyfriends who initially seemed successful but inevitably turned out to be unreliable. 3 months ago, her latest relationship imploded when her husband of barely a year, Jason, left her for his fitness instructor. "She's coming home for a while to regroup," Mom informed me during our monthly phone call. "Poor thing has had such bad luck." That's when the visits to my penthouse began increasing. My parents had rarely made the trip into the city before, but suddenly they were appearing every other weekend, marveling at the view, commenting on the extravagance of my home. "It's just so much space for one person," Mom remarked during their 3rd visit, running her hand along my kitchen counter. "Don't you get lonely up here all by yourself?" Rebecca started coming too, often staying overnight on my guest bed, leaving makeup stains on my Egyptian cotton towels, and borrowing my designer clothes without asking. "We're sisters," she'd say if I objected. "What's yours is mine, right?" I didn't realize then that they were laying the groundwork for what was coming next. I didn't see that their compliments about my gorgeous place were actually assessments of what they planned to take. The invitation seemed innocent enough. Mom called on a Tuesday, asking me to come for a family dinner that Friday. "We haven't all sat down together in a while," she said. "I'm making your favorite pot roast." I brought an expensive bottle of wine, dressed nicely, and arrived at their suburban home at the requested time of 7 p.m. sharp. The atmosphere felt strange from the moment I walked in. Dad was wearing a button-down shirt instead of his usual after-work t-shirt. Mom had set the dining room table with the good china we only used for holidays, and Rebecca was uncharacteristically quiet, avoiding eye contact. The conversation during dinner was strained, focusing on neutral topics like a neighbor's new landscaping and an upcoming church fundraiser. As Mom cleared the dinner plates and brought out coffee, Dad cleared his throat. "Amber, we need to discuss something important as a family," he began, his tone serious in a way that immediately put me on edge. Mom placed a hand on Rebecca's shoulder. "Your sister is going through a difficult transition right now. Jason left her with nothing," Dad continued. "The apartment was in his name, and she's starting over from scratch." I nodded sympathetically. "That's tough. I'm sure she'll bounce back soon." "The thing is," Mom interjected, "at her age, it's so hard to get established in this economy. Not everyone has been as fortunate as you." I tensed at the word fortunate, which diminished years of sacrifice and hard work to mere luck. Dad reached beside his chair and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table. "We've been thinking about this as a family, and we believe Rebecca deserves a fresh start. I've always supported her," I said carefully. "I'm happy to help her look for apartments in her budget or—" "That's not what we mean," Dad interrupted, sliding the folder toward me. "Family takes care of family, Amber." I opened the folder and froze. Inside was a legal document for the transfer of property, my penthouse, to Rebecca. "Is this a joke?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Rebecca finally spoke up, her eyes suddenly brimming with tears that seemed to appear on command. "I've lost everything, Amber. My marriage, my home, my stability. And you want my home?" I stared at her in disbelief. "You can easily buy another place," Mom said. "You're established, successful. Rebecca needs this chance to get back on her feet." "That penthouse is my life's work," I said, feeling like I'd entered some bizarre alternate reality. "I sacrificed everything for years to afford it." "Don't be dramatic," Dad dismissed. "It's just an apartment." "Just an apartment?" I echoed. "Do you have any idea what it took for me to buy it? The years of double shifts, living with 4 roommates, skipping vacations and social events." Rebecca dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "You've always been the lucky one. Everything comes so easily to you." I nearly choked on the absurdity of her statement. "Easy? I worked 60-hour weeks for years while you were partying through college on Mom and Dad's dime." "That's enough," Dad said sharply. "We're not asking, Amber. This is what's happening. The family has decided." "The family?" I repeated. "You mean the 3 of you decided, behind my back, that I should give up my home to Rebecca?" Mom reached for my hand, which I pulled away. "Sweetie, we know it's a sacrifice, but family makes sacrifices for each other." I looked at the documents more carefully and noticed something that made my blood run cold. "These are already prepared. You've already been to a lawyer about this." Dad nodded. "Martin drew them up for us last week. All that's needed is your signature." Martin was their family attorney, a man who had never once called me for input on this life-altering decision. The betrayal cut deeper with each passing second. "This is insane," I said, pushing back from the table. "I'm not signing over my home." End of discussion. Rebecca's tears vanished as quickly as they'd appeared, replaced by a cold anger. "You've always been selfish. All your life, it's been about you and what you want." Dad's face hardened. "If you walk out without signing these papers, you're no longer part of this family." "I mean it, Amber." I stood, trembling with shock and rage. If being part of this family means giving up everything I've worked for, then maybe I don't want to be part of it. Mom began crying in earnest. "How can you say that? After all we've done for you." I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. Their accusations following me like darts. We raised you better than this. Your sister would do it for you. Is property more important than family? The last thing I heard as I slammed the door was Dad's voice, cold and certain. She'll come around. She has nowhere else to go but this family. I cried the entire drive home, my vision blurring so badly that I had to pull over twice. When I finally reached my penthouse, the home they expected me to simply hand over, I sat on my terrace looking over the city lights, wondering how the people who were supposed to love me most could betray me so completely. The morning after the dinner, it began. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom at 6:30 a.m. "We're disappointed in your behavior last night. Call when you're ready to discuss this reasonably." By noon, Dad had left 3 voicemails, each progressively more stern. The last one simply stated, "This isn't going away, Amber. The sooner you accept it, the easier this will be for everyone." Rebecca's approach was different. She texted photos of apartment listings in Queens and Brooklyn with comments like, "Since you'll need somewhere to live soon," and "These seem more your speed anyway." I blocked her number, only to have her create new accounts to continue the harassment. The calls expanded beyond my immediate family by day 3. Aunt Patricia phoned, her voice dripping with disappointment. "I've never known you to be selfish, Amber. Your poor sister has nothing." Uncle Greg was next. "Your father tells me you're refusing to help Rebecca. That doesn't sound like the niece I know." Even my 80-year-old grandmother called, clearly fed a script about how in my day, family meant something sacred. I stopped answering calls from unknown numbers, but the voicemails piled up. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, my parents' church friends, even my father's golf buddies, all expressing their concern about my uncharacteristic behavior. The following Monday, as I sat in a meeting with clients, my assistant knocked urgently at the conference room door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but your mother is in the lobby, and she's quite upset. She's refusing to leave." Mortified, I excused myself and rushed to the reception area to find Mom dramatically dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief while the receptionist looked on uncomfortably. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "You won't answer your phone," she sobbed loudly, drawing attention from everyone in the vicinity. What choice did I have? I pulled her into a side office, humiliation burning through me. "You can't just show up at my workplace." "Rebecca tried to harm herself last night," she hissed, though her tears mysteriously dried up once we were alone. "She feels so hopeless without a fresh start." My stomach dropped. "Is she okay?" "She will be when she has a stable home," Mom replied. The emotional manipulation so transparent it made me nauseous. As the week progressed, I noticed colleagues giving me strange looks. During a team lunch, Stephanie, one of the few people I considered a real friend, pulled me aside. "I don't know what's going on, but someone's been spreading rumors about you," she whispered. "Something about fraud in your property acquisitions?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are they saying exactly?" "That you misappropriated family funds to buy your penthouse." It's ridiculous, obviously, but the accounting department received an anonymous email asking them to review your transactions. The next day, I discovered someone had created a Facebook group called Justice for Rebecca Wilson that included distant relatives and mutual childhood acquaintances. The group description claimed I had stolen Rebecca's inheritance and was forcing her into homelessness out of spite. Stephanie urged me to speak with an attorney. "This is crossing into defamation territory, Amber. You need protection." I made an appointment with James Parker, a lawyer recommended by Stephanie who specialized in family law and defamation cases. After reviewing the property documents and the escalating messages, he confirmed what I already knew. "You have no legal obligation to transfer your property to anyone," he assured me. "What your family is doing constitutes harassment and potentially defamation, depending on these fraud allegations." Just as I was considering a cease and desist letter, Dad escalated to a new level. His text read simply, "I have documentation about financial irregularities during your first property purchase. Would be a shame if your firm received it." I stared at the message in disbelief. He was threatening to fabricate evidence of financial misconduct, something that could destroy my career if I didn't give up my home. That night, I could barely sleep, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. By morning, The dark circles under my eyes matched the heaviness in my chest. The people who should have been my strongest supporters were instead my worst nightmare, and I had no idea how to make it stop. 3 weeks into the pressure campaign, I was a shadow of myself. I'd lost weight, my hands shook constantly, and I found it increasingly difficult to concentrate at work. My performance was slipping, and I'd started making errors that were completely uncharacteristic for me. I came home one evening to find Rebecca standing outside my building with 3 large suitcases and several cardboard boxes. "What are you doing here?" I asked, tensing immediately. Moving in, of course, she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The doorman wouldn't let me up without you. Rebecca, you can't just." Without warning, she shoved past me toward the building entrance, dragging a suitcase. "Mom and Dad are on their way with the rest of my things." I grabbed her arm. "Stop, you can't do this." "Watch me," she snapped, yanking free. "Unless you want me to make a scene in front of your fancy building? I'm sure your neighbors would love to hear about how you're leaving your own sister homeless." The threat hung in the air, and I knew she'd do it. Rebecca had always been willing to create public spectacles to get her way. The thought of her screaming accusations in the lobby, in front of neighbors I respected and the building staff I saw daily, was unbearable. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth. "But this is temporary, Rebecca. One night, and we'll talk tomorrow." Her smirk told me she knew she'd won this round. That night expanded into a nightmare week. My parents arrived with more of her belongings, treating me like a reluctant innkeeper rather than the owner of the home they were invading. "The guest room is a bit small," Mom commented, inspecting my apartment like she was conducting a hotel review. "Rebecca really needs more space." "It's the master bedroom or nothing," Rebecca declared, already carrying her things toward my bedroom. "Absolutely not," I protested. Dad put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Your grandmother's been asking about you, Amber. Her heart condition's been acting up with all this family stress." The implication was clear. My resistance was endangering Grandma's health. Another manipulation, but one that hit its mark. Grandma was the one family member I truly adored, the person who had always believed in me. 1 week, I conceded, feeling defeated. She can stay 1 week while she looks for her own place. That night, relegated to my guest room, surrounded by Rebecca's overflow belongings, I heard my sister on the phone through the wall. "Phase 1 complete," she said in a hushed voice. "She's caving already. Dad was right. Push her hard enough, and she'll give in." "No, I don't think she suspects anything about the business plan. Just keep the pressure on, and I'll have her signature within a month." I lay frozen in the darkness, the reality of their coordinated attack becoming clear. This wasn't just family pressure. This was a calculated plan with some underlying purpose I didn't yet understand. The next morning, I found Rebecca rummaging through my home office, my financial documents spread across the desk. "What are you doing?" I demanded. She didn't even look guilty. "Just trying to understand your finances better. After all, I'll need to know how to handle the property expenses once it's mine." "Get out," I said, gathering the papers. "These are private." "Nothing's private in family," she replied with a cold smile. Days turned into weeks. Rebecca commandeered my master bedroom, invited friends over for loud parties that prompted complaints from neighbors, and systematically violated every boundary I tried to establish. I found wine stains on my white sofa, cigarette burns on the terrace furniture, and my favorite vase mysteriously shattered. My utilities bills doubled, yet Rebecca contributed nothing. When I confronted her, she batted her eyes and said, "I thought this was your gift to me. If you're going to be petty about electricity, how will you ever give me the whole apartment?" One evening, returning from a long day at work, my key wouldn't turn in the lock. Rebecca had changed the locks without telling me. I spent the night in my office, sleeping on the small sofa in my private bathroom, too embarrassed to tell anyone I'd been locked out of my own home. The next morning, Rebecca acted like nothing had happened, handing me a new key with a casual, "Oh, I meant to tell you about that." My neighbor Kyle Fisher from across the hall stopped me in the elevator 3 days later. "Amber, is everything okay? I've seen some concerning people coming and going from your apartment while you're at work. They don't seem like your usual crowd." Kyle described several men he didn't recognize carrying large bags into my apartment, staying for hours, then leaving with different bags. I wouldn't normally say anything, but one of them was trying doorknobs in the hallway when he thought no one was watching. When I confronted Rebecca, she dismissed my concerns. Just some friends helping me organize. You're being paranoid. The final straw came when I returned home early one day with a migraine to find Rebecca's latest boyfriend, Mark, going through my jewelry box. He claimed to be looking for aspirin, despite being in my bedroom rather than the bathroom. That night, Kyle helped me document the state of my apartment, the damages, the missing items, the signs of uninvited guests. You need to get her out, he advised. This is beyond family drama. Something doesn't feel right. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the apartment association. Complaints had been filed about unauthorized business activities in my unit, and an investigation was pending that could result in forced sale of the property. That same evening, I came home to find my prized art collection, pieces I'd carefully acquired over years, damaged by what Rebecca claimed was an accident with a wine bottle. The centerpiece, an original canvas from an emerging artist that had tripled in value since I purchased it, had a slash across the middle that looked suspiciously deliberate. Standing in my violated space, surrounded by the wreckage of my carefully built life, I felt something inside me break. The constant pressure, the lack of sleep, the stress at work, the betrayal. It had all become too much to bear. When my phone rang with my mother's number for the 5th time that day, I finally answered. We're having a family meeting at church tomorrow, she announced without preamble. Pastor Bill will be mediating, 6 o'clock sharp. Too exhausted to fight anymore? I simply whispered, Fine. Living with Rebecca quickly devolved from uncomfortable to unbearable. Each day brought new violations of my space, my privacy, and my sanity. My once pristine apartment now resembled a college dormitory after a weekend bender. Empty wine bottles accumulated on countertops, dirty dishes piled in the sink, and mysterious stains appeared on my designer furniture. The scent of expensive candles that once perfumed my home was replaced by the lingering odor of cigarettes, despite my strict no-smoking policy. Rebecca's friends, a rotating cast of characters I'd never met before, treated my home as their personal party venue. They arrived at all hours, raided my refrigerator without asking, and left trails of destruction in their wake. One morning, I found a stranger passed out in my bathtub. Lighten up, Rebecca would say whenever I objected. It's just stuff. You can afford to replace it. But it wasn't just stuff disappearing. My grandmother's antique silver bracelet vanished from my jewelry box. A pair of diamond earrings given to me by my first major client, gone. Even the expensive bottle of scotch I'd been saving for a special occasion somehow evaporated, replaced with colored water in the original bottle, as if I wouldn't notice. Maybe you misplaced them, Rebecca suggested with an innocent shrug when I confronted her about the missing items. You've been so scattered lately. The gaslighting was relentless. She'd move my keys, hide important documents, then express concern about my failing memory when I frantically searched for them. I started doubting myself, wondering if the stress was affecting my mind. Financial sabotage became her specialty. She'd crank the air conditioning while I was at work, leaving it blasting all day in an empty apartment. She took hour-long showers, ran the dishwasher half-empty, and left every light burning 24/7. My utility bills tripled, becoming so outrageous that I had to dip into my savings to cover them. You should just add me to your accounts, she suggested one evening, scrolling through her phone while I reviewed the shocking electricity bill. It would be easier than me paying you back, since we both know this place will be mine eventually. When I returned home one Friday evening after a particularly grueling workday, my key wouldn't turn in the lock. Again. This time, the lock had been completely changed. A heavy-duty deadbolt replacing my original hardware. I called Rebecca repeatedly, each call going straight to voicemail. After an hour of waiting in the hallway, I gave up and went to a hotel, too humiliated to call anyone for help. The next morning, Rebecca acted surprised when I showed up with my suitcase. Oh, I meant to tell you about the new security system, she said, not even trying to sound convincing. The building manager recommended it after those break-ins on the 5th floor. There had been no break-ins. It was a complete fabrication, but challenging her only led to more elaborate lies. I slept at my office 3 nights the following week when Rebecca accidentally locked the security chain while thinking I was home already. My assistant noticed my wrinkled clothes and the dark circles under my eyes, but was too professional to comment. Kyle Fisher, my neighbor across the hall, became an unexpected ally during this nightmare. He worked from home as a software developer and started documenting the parade of strangers entering and exiting my apartment while I was away. "I don't want to overstep," he said, showing me time-stamped photos he'd discreetly taken from his peephole. "But these guys don't look like social visitors. They're carrying in empty duffel bags and leaving with full ones." The men in the photos were rough-looking, with the hardened expressions of people accustomed to operating in shadows. One image showed a man testing doorknobs down the hallway, methodically checking each apartment while glancing over his shoulder. "I reported it to building security," Kyle continued, "but they said without proof of criminal activity, they can't ban visitors. I thought you should know who's in your home when you're not there." Kyle helped me install a small, hidden security camera in my living room bookshelf. The footage it captured confirmed my worst fears. Rebecca's boyfriend, Mark, using my address to meet with people for what appeared to be illicit business transactions. Cash exchanged hands, packages were passed, and my dining room table had become the meeting point for their operations. The next blow came when the building's homeowners association sent a formal complaint notice. Multiple residents had reported suspicious activities and excessive noise disturbances originating from my unit. The letter warned that continued violations could result in forced sale of the property under the association's bylaws. I confronted Rebecca that evening, waving the letter in her face. "Do you realize what you're doing? I could lose this place because of you." She barely looked up from her phone. "Everyone in this building is ancient and uptight. They should mind their own business." "This is their business," I shouted, my composure finally shattering. "This is a residential building, not a nightclub or whatever the hell you and Mark are running here." At the mention of Mark, something shifted in her expression. A momentary flash of something that looked almost like fear before her typical mask of indifference returned. "Mark is helping me start a business," she said vaguely. "We're just having meetings. What kind of business requires sketchy men with duffel bags coming and going at all hours?" "You wouldn't understand," she snapped. "Not everyone can be a perfect, prissy real estate princess like you." The next morning, I woke to find Mark had moved in overnight. His malodorous gym bags piled in my hallway, his toiletries crowding my guest bathroom counter. He strutted around my kitchen in boxers, drinking directly from my orange juice carton. "Morning, roomie," he smirked, scratching his chest hair. "Hope you don't mind me crashing here for a bit. Landlord issues, you know how it is." I looked to Rebecca, who avoided my gaze. "You didn't even ask me." "You're never here anyway," she replied, dismissively. "And it's going to be our place soon. So what's the big deal?" My health began to deteriorate under the constant stress. I developed insomnia, jumping at every sound in the night. My hair started falling out in clumps, and stress-induced eczema flared across my neck and arms. I lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks, my clothes hanging loosely from my frame. Work suffered too. I missed deadlines, fumbled presentations, and found myself unable to focus during important meetings. My boss, concerned about my sudden decline in performance, suggested I take some personal days to sort out whatever is going on. The final devastation came when I returned home early, hoping for a few hours of peace while Rebecca was supposedly out shopping. Instead, I found her and Mark hosting what appeared to be a small party in my living room. As I entered, Mark knocked into my prized art collection, pieces I'd carefully curated over years, each representing a personal milestone in my career. My centerpiece, an original oil painting by an emerging artist that I'd purchased with the commission from my first major property sale, crashed to the floor. The canvas tore as the frame shattered, the damage clearly irreparable. "Oops," Mark said with a laugh that held no remorse. "Guess you'll need to redecorate anyway once this place gets a masculine touch." I stood frozen, watching as strangers stepped over the broken frame, tracking paint across my hardwood floors. Rebecca didn't even acknowledge the destruction, continuing her conversation as if nothing had happened. That night, alone in the guest bathroom, the only space that still felt marginally mine, I finally broke down completely. sobbing on the cold tile floor. I realized I couldn't win this war of attrition. They would simply keep escalating, keep destroying, keep pushing until I gave in or completely collapsed. When my phone rang with my mother's number the next morning, I answered automatically, too exhausted to resist anymore. "We're meeting with Pastor Bill tomorrow evening at the church," she announced without preamble. "The entire family will be there. It's time to resolve this situation once and for all." Her tone left no room for argument, and truthfully, I had no fight left in me. "Fine," I whispered. "What time?" 6 o'clock. "Don't be late. And dress appropriately. This is God's house." As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, hollow-eyed, gaunt, defeated. The strong, independent woman who had built a successful career through grit and determination was barely recognizable. I thought about my options. I could continue fighting a battle that was destroying me physically and mentally. I could involve the police. But what would I say? My family is pressuring me to give away my property. My sister is a terrible houseguest? Nothing they were doing was technically illegal. It was just systematic emotional torture designed to break me down. Maybe surrender was my only choice. I could start over somewhere else. Somewhere far from their toxic presence. It wouldn't be the first time I'd rebuilt from nothing. With this thought, I began packing a small suitcase with my remaining valuables and irreplaceable mementos, preparing for what felt like inevitable exile from my own life. The church parking lot was nearly full when I arrived at 5:55 p.m. I recognized vehicles belonging not just to my immediate family, but to aunts, uncles, and family friends. This wasn't a meeting, it was an ambush. I sat in my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel, contemplating driving away. But where would I go? Back to my invaded home? My office sofa? I was running out of safe spaces. Pastor Bill greeted me at the entrance with a concerned smile. He'd known our family for decades, had baptized both Rebecca and me as infants. I'd always respected him, but seeing him participate in this charade made my stomach turn. "Amber, we're all here to support you through this difficult time," he said, guiding me toward the church's community room. As the door opened, I froze. At least 20 people sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle. My parents, Rebecca, aunts, uncles, cousins, church elders, and family friends. My mother had even brought my grandmother, who looked frail and confused in her wheelchair. This wasn't family mediation. This was a public tribunal. "Take a seat, Amber," Dad instructed, pointing to a lone chair facing the group. I remained standing. "What is this?" "An intervention," Mom replied. "We're all concerned about the person you've become." For the next hour, I endured what could only be described as a coordinated character assassination. One by one, family members expressed their disappointment and concern about my selfish behavior and materialistic values. Aunt Patricia tearfully described how I'd always been jealous of Rebecca, a complete fabrication. Uncle Greg suggested my career success had changed me for the worse. Mom's best friend from high school, a woman I barely knew, lamented how I'd lost touch with Christian values. Through it all, Rebecca sat between my parents, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of victim perfectly. Pastor Bill eventually raised his hand to quiet the group. "Amber, your family loves you deeply. They're worried about the path you've chosen, placing material wealth above family bonds. The Bible teaches us that the love of money is the root of all evil." "This isn't about money," I said, my voice hoarse after nearly an hour of silence. "It's about respect, about acknowledging the work I've put in to build my life." "Sweetheart," Mom interjected, "no one is saying you haven't worked hard. But Rebecca has nothing. As Christians, we're called to help those less fortunate." "Then why don't you give her your house?" I countered. The room fell silent, shocked by my audacity. Dad cleared his throat. "Because your sister deserves to live somewhere that matches her potential. Your mother and I are approaching retirement. We can't provide that for her anymore, but you can." "Her potential?" I repeated incredulously. "What about my potential? What about what I deserve after years of hard work?" "You've had your turn to succeed," Dad said dismissively. "Now it's Rebecca's turn." Pastor Bill placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Amber, sometimes God calls us to make sacrifices for those we love. Christian forgiveness means giving without expectation of return. I shrugged away his touch. Don't use religion to manipulate me. There's nothing Christian about what's happening here. Dad stood abruptly, his patience visibly exhausted. Enough debate. We've brought the papers. He produced the now familiar folder from his briefcase. It's time to do what's right for this family. Grandmother's frail voice rose from her wheelchair. Amber, please. My heart can't take much more family discord. Looking at her beloved face, now creased with worry, I felt my resolve crumbling. I couldn't be responsible for harming her. As if sensing my weakness, Dad placed the folder and a pen on a small table beside me. Sign today, and you can continue being part of this family. Refuse. And you're choosing to walk away from everyone in this room. The church suddenly felt airless, the walls closing in. 20 pairs of eyes watched me, waiting for my surrender. I need air, I managed to say, heading for the door. In the parking lot, I gulped in the evening air, feeling like a drowning person breaking the surface. A moment later, I heard footsteps behind me. Running away again? It was Mark, Rebecca's boyfriend, his tone mocking. Leave me alone, I said without turning. He grabbed my arm, spinning me to face him. Listen carefully. You're going to sign those papers tonight. You're going to do it with a smile. And you're going to vacate the apartment within a week. Or what? I challenged, yanking my arm free. His smile disappeared. Or I'll make sure certain photos of you end up in your company's email system. Photos that would destroy your professional reputation. What photos? I don't know what you're talking about. You don't need to, he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Just know they exist, and they're convincing enough to end your career. Sign the papers, or by this time next week, you'll have no home and no job. The threat hung in the air between us, chilling despite the warm evening. You're bluffing, I said, but uncertainty crept into my voice. Try me. His confidence suggested this wasn't an empty threat. Oh, and if you're thinking of mentioning this conversation to anyone in there, don't. It would be a shame if your sweet grandmother had another health crisis because of your stubbornness. He walked away, leaving me shaking in the parking lot. When I returned to the community room, the atmosphere had shifted. My family watched me expectantly, sensing victory. Dad pushed the papers toward me again. Well, with trembling fingers, I picked up the pen. I had 1 week until the final signing. 1 week to find a solution or lose everything. I'll sign the preliminary papers, I said quietly, but the final transfer requires notarization. I'll arrange that next week. The relief in the room was palpable. Rebecca smiled triumphantly, while my parents exchanged satisfied glances. You're doing the right thing, Pastor Bill assured me. As I signed my name on the initial agreement, I wondered if I would ever recover from this betrayal. Not just losing my home, but losing the illusion that family meant unconditional love and support. On the drive home, I pulled over twice when tears blurred my vision too severely to continue. By the time I reached my apartment building, decision had hardened within me. I would find a small place to rent, start over, and cut all ties with the people who had systematically dismantled my life. Some wounds were too deep to heal, some betrayals too complete to forgive. The week following the church ambush passed in a fog of defeat and resignation. I began boxing up my belongings, separating what I'd take to whatever small apartment I could find from what I'd have to sell or store. Each cherished item I wrapped in newspaper felt like burying a piece of my former life. Rebecca moved through the apartment with increasing confidence, already measuring windows for new curtains and discussing paint colors with Mark. They no longer bothered to hide their conversations when I was present, as if I had already ceased to exist in my own home. The master bath needs a complete overhaul, she declared one evening. That soaking tub is so last decade. The soaking tub where I'd spent countless evenings unwinding after long workdays, watching the city lights shimmer while planning my next career move. Now it was just another item on her renovation list. I'd taken a week of personal leave from work, unable to focus and unwilling to face questions about my haggard appearance. My boss had been understanding but concerned, suggesting I speak with the company's employee assistance counselor. I couldn't bring myself to explain that my own family had orchestrated my downfall. On Wednesday evening, 3 days before the final signing date, I was sorting through documents in my home office when an email notification pinged on my laptop. The subject line stopped me cold. Do not sign the transfer papers. The sender was unknown. Truthfinder87@protonmail.com. I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me click. The message was brief. I have evidence of what they're really planning. Don't sign anything. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m. Hudson River Park bench across from Pier 62. Come alone. I stared at the screen, suspicion warring with desperate hope. Was this some kind of trap set by Mark? A cruel prank? Or could someone actually have information that might help me? After a sleepless night, I decided I had nothing left to lose. I told Rebecca I had a doctor's appointment and left the apartment before she could question me further. The park was busy with lunchtime crowds when I arrived. I sat on the designated bench, constantly scanning my surroundings, half expecting Mark or my father to appear. At exactly 2 p.m., a man in a gray jacket sat beside me, keeping his gaze on the river. "Amber Wilson?" he asked quietly. I nodded, studying him from the corner of my eye. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with close-cropped dark hair and alert eyes that continually surveyed our surroundings. "My name is Cameron Hayes. I'm an investigative journalist with the City Chronicle." He showed me a press credential briefly before tucking it away. "I've been investigating Mark Donovan for the past 8 months. Rebecca's boyfriend? Why? Because he's not just a boyfriend. He's the front man for a real estate fraud operation that's been targeting high-value properties throughout Manhattan." He handed me a thin file folder. "Don't open this here. Review it somewhere private." "Why are you helping me?" I asked, clutching the folder. "Because you're not the first victim, but you could be the last. If you sign those papers on Saturday, you won't just lose your home. You'll potentially be implicated in their scheme." My blood ran cold. What scheme? Cameron's expression darkened. "Mark's group identifies valuable properties in specific locations, then acquires them through various means, sometimes legitimate purchases, often through pressure or blackmail. They then use these properties as collateral for fraudulent loans, or as addresses for shell companies. Your penthouse is particularly valuable to them because of its location." "What's special about the location?" "It's in one of the few remaining blocks they need to complete their portfolio. With your building, they'll control properties on every corner of the district they're targeting." He glanced at his watch. "I have to go. Read the file. If you want to fight back, call the number inside." Before I could ask another question, he stood and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of pedestrians. I waited until I was alone in a quiet cafe before opening the folder. Inside were surveillance photos of Mark meeting with men in expensive suits, printouts of property records showing a pattern of acquisitions across a specific section of Manhattan, and most disturbingly, transcripts of recorded conversations. One transcript showed a conversation between Mark and an unnamed associate. "Mark, the Wilson property is the cornerstone. Once we have it, we control the entire block." Associate, "The sisters still resisting?" Mark, "Not for long. The family's doing most of the work for us. They think they're getting a cut, but they have no idea what's really happening." Associate, "And they believe you're just helping the sister?" Mark, laughing, "People believe what they want to believe. The parents think they're securing their retirement. The sister thinks she's getting a free penthouse. By the time anyone realizes what's happened, the property will be leveraged to the hilt, and will be long gone." My hands trembled as I read further. There was a transcript of a phone call between my father and Mark. "Mark, is she going to sign on Saturday?" Richard, "She will. We've made sure she has no other options." Mark, "Good. Remember, you and Diana get 10% of the final deal." Richard, "We discussed 15%. Mark, "That was before we had to rush the timeline. 10% of $8 million is still a nice retirement fund." Richard, "What about Rebecca?" Mark, pause, "Rebecca will be taken care of." The implications were staggering. My parents weren't just trying to help Rebecca. They were actively profiting from the theft of my home. And based on Mark's ominous tone about Rebecca being taken care of, she might be as much a pawn as I was. The final document in the folder was a business card with Cameron's number and a handwritten note. Records of all transactions available. Enough to stop the transfer and potentially pursue criminal charges. Your call. I sat in the cafe for hours, reading and rereading the evidence, my shock gradually transforming into cold anger. This wasn't just family betrayal anymore. It was criminal conspiracy. That evening, I called the number. I want to fight back, I told Cameron when he answered. But I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. We arranged to meet the following day at his office, where he laid out the full scope of his investigation. Mark Donovan isn't even his real name, Cameron explained, spreading photographs across his desk. He's Michael Dennison, previously investigated for real estate fraud in Chicago and Boston. He disappeared for a few years, then resurfaced in New York with a new identity and the same playbook. He showed me documentation of similar cases. People pressured into transferring valuable properties, which were then used as fronts for money laundering operations or leveraged for fraudulent loans. The genius of his operation is that he rarely uses direct threats or violence. He finds vulnerable targets and lets their own family or friends do the dirty work. How did you find me? I asked. Cameron hesitated before answering. Your neighbor, Kyle Fisher, contacted me. He recognized Mark from an article I wrote about real estate scams. Kyle has been helping me document their activities in your building. I felt a surge of gratitude toward Kyle, making a mental note to thank him properly if I ever got my life back. The signing is scheduled for Saturday morning at my parents' church, I said. What can we do in less than 48 hours? Cameron leaned forward, determination evident in his expression. We can set a trap. One that exposes them not just to you, but to everyone they've been manipulating. He outlined a plan so audacious it seemed impossible. Yet as he explained each step, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. It's risky, he cautioned. If they suspect anything, they could accelerate their timeline or destroy evidence. I have nothing left to lose, I replied. My family has already destroyed every ounce of trust I had in them. At least this way, I go down fighting. We spent the night preparing, gathering equipment, rehearsing scenarios, and ensuring every detail was covered. By dawn, we had a comprehensive strategy to not just save my home but expose the entire operation. As I left Cameron's office in the early morning light, exhausted but resolute, he touched my arm lightly. Your family betrayed you in the worst possible way, he said quietly. But sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the one we're born into. You're not alone in this fight. For the first time in months, I believed that might be true. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect day for justice. I dressed carefully in a conservative navy dress, applied makeup to hide my exhaustion, and drove to the church with a calm that surprised even me. The fear and desperation that had plagued me for months had been replaced by steely determination. The church parking lot was already filled with familiar vehicles, my parents' sedan, Rebecca's compact, and several cars belonging to extended family. As planned, I texted Cameron. Everyone's here. Inside, the scene was nearly identical to our previous intervention. The same semicircle of chairs, the same faces wearing expressions of righteous concern. Pastor Bill stood at the front beside a small table where the final transfer documents lay waiting. Amber, my mother greeted stiffly. I'm glad you've come to your senses. I nodded without speaking, taking my assigned seat. Rebecca sat between my parents, wearing a demure floral dress that couldn't quite disguise her triumphant smile. Mark stood behind them, his hand possessively on Rebecca's shoulder. Before we begin, Pastor Bill announced, "Let us pray for harmony and healing in this family." As heads bowed, I glanced at my watch. Right on schedule, the church door opened silently, and Cameron slipped in, accompanied by Kyle and two technicians carrying equipment bags. They moved quickly and quietly to the rear of the room, setting up as we had rehearsed. Pastor Bill concluded his prayer, unaware of the new arrivals. We're gathered today to witness a beautiful act of sisterly love and family unity. Amber has agreed to transfer ownership of her property to Rebecca, demonstrating that material possessions are nothing compared to family bonds. My father stood, lifting the documents. Everything is in order. All we need is your signature, Amber, and our family can begin healing. I rose slowly, approaching the table. Every eye in the room watched me, anticipating my surrender. Before I sign, I said clearly, I think everyone should know exactly what they're witnessing today. My father's expression hardened. There's nothing to discuss. Sign the papers. Actually, there's quite a lot to discuss. I turned to address the entire room. Like why my sister's boyfriend is using a false identity, or why my parents are receiving a 10% commission on my property, or how this entire charade is part of a real estate fraud scheme. A confused murmur spread through the room. Rebecca's face paled, while Mark's expression darkened dangerously. Amber is clearly unwell. My mother interjected quickly. She's been under tremendous stress. I'm the sanest I've been in months, I replied. And I have proof of everything I'm saying. I nodded to Cameron, who stepped forward with a laptop. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Cameron Hayes. I'm an investigative journalist with The City Chronicle, and for the past 8 months, I've been investigating a real estate fraud operation run by this man. He pointed directly at Mark. This is ridiculous, Mark sputtered. Pastor, this is your church. Are you going to allow this disruption? Pastor Bill looked bewildered. What exactly is happening here? The truth is happening, I said firmly. Kyle, would you connect the laptop to the projector, please? Kyle, who had introduced himself to Pastor Bill earlier as a technical assistant, had already connected the necessary cables. The church's large projection screen illuminated with a series of surveillance photos showing Mark meeting with known criminals. Mark Donovan is actually Michael Dennison, Cameron explained, advancing through the slides. He's wanted for questioning in similar fraud cases in 2 other states. His operation targets high-value properties in specific locations, acquires them through manipulation or coercion, then uses them for money laundering and fraudulent loan schemes. The church fell silent as Cameron played audio recordings of Mark discussing the Wilson property and how my family was doing most of the work for us. When my father's voice filled the room, discussing his percentage of the final deal, gasps echoed through the congregation. That's not your taking things out of context, my father stammered. His face ashen. I turned to face him directly. There is no context that justifies what you've done. Rebecca stood suddenly, her eyes wild. Mark, what is this? What are they talking about? It's nothing, baby, Mark said smoothly. Your sister is desperate, making up stories. Am I making this up too? I nodded to Cameron, who played the recording where Mark discussed how Rebecca will be taken care of. What does that mean? Rebecca demanded, backing away from him. What were you planning to do? Once the property was transferred to your name, Cameron explained, you would have been the legal owner of record and the person legally responsible when the fraud was discovered. Your signature would be on all the documents. You'd be facing criminal charges while Mark disappeared with the money. Rebecca turned to our parents, disbelief etched across her face. Did you know about this? Were you really getting paid? My mother couldn't meet her eyes. My father attempted damage control. We were securing our retirement. We would have shared with you, of course. By making me the fall person? Rebecca's voice rose hysterically. Your own daughter? The situation was devolving rapidly. Mark began edging toward the exit, but Kyle and one of Cameron's associates moved to block his path. This isn't just about family betrayal, Cameron continued, addressing the stunned congregation. This is about criminal activity. Everything you're witnessing is being live-streamed to the City Chronicle's website, and copies of all evidence have been provided to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. For the first time, I noticed the small cameras positioned around the room, their red lights blinking steadily. On Cameron's laptop screen, a counter showed over 2,000 people watching the livestream. You can't do this, Mark growled, lunging toward Cameron. 2 uniformed police officers who had been waiting outside entered the church. Michael Dennison? One called out, "We have some questions for you." What followed was chaos. Mark attempted to flee, knocking over chairs as he ran for a side exit, only to find it blocked by another officer. My father shouted about family business and invasion of privacy. My mother dissolved into theatrical sobs. In the midst of the pandemonium, Rebecca approached me, her expression unreadable. Did you know? I asked her quietly. Were you part of the scheme? Tears filled her eyes, genuine ones this time. I believed what they told me, that you had everything, and I deserved a turn. I didn't know about any fraud. I swear, Amber. I wasn't sure I believed her, but her shock seemed real enough. Pastor Bill, who had watched the entire scene unfold with increasing horror, finally found his voice. Richard, Diana, is this true? Were you profiting from this arrangement? My father's silence was damning. The Wilson family has been pillars of this community for decades, Pastor Bill continued. His disappointment palpable. I cannot believe you would use the church as a venue for what appears to be criminal activity. As the police escorted Mark from the building in handcuffs, cameramen from local news stations began arriving, alerted by Cameron's associates. The story was spreading beyond the live stream now, becoming breaking news. I walked to the table where the transfer documents lay, and ceremoniously tore them in half, then in quarters. The symbolic act brought a strange sense of closure. My parents approached, their earlier confidence replaced by desperate damage control. Amber, we can explain everything, my father began. Save it for your lawyer, I replied coldly. And for the record, I may be your daughter biologically, but we are no longer family. As they were led away for questioning, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound emptiness where family bonds had once existed. The victory was hollow. I had saved my home but lost my family, though perhaps they had never truly been mine to lose. Cameron approached as the crowd thinned, the excitement dying down. You did it, he said simply. You stood your ground. We did it, I corrected him. I couldn't have done this alone. Outside the church, in the bright afternoon sunlight, reporters clamored for comments. With Cameron and Kyle flanking me protectively, I gave a brief statement about fraud awareness and the importance of due diligence in property transactions, avoiding the personal details of my family's betrayal. As we walked toward my car, exhaustion finally overtook me. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation drained away, leaving me hollow and spent. What happens now? I asked Cameron. Now, he replied. You go home. Your actual home, that belongs to you and only you. And you start rebuilding your life without them. It sounded so simple and so impossible all at once. The weeks following the church exposé passed in a blur of legal meetings, police interviews, and media inquiries. Mark, or Michael as I now knew him, was charged with multiple counts of fraud and was being investigated in connection with similar schemes in other states. My parents faced charges of conspiracy and accessory to fraud, their reputations in the community shattered. Rebecca, after extensive questioning, was deemed an unwitting participant rather than a co-conspirator. The investigators concluded that she had been manipulated as much as I had, though in different ways. While this technically absolved her, the damage to our relationship seemed irreparable. The first thing I did after regaining undisputed control of my home was change every lock. Kyle helped me install a state-of-the-art security system, and I hired professionals to sweep the apartment for any surveillance devices Mark might have planted. They found 3 hidden cameras in the living room, my home office, and master bedroom. The violation made my skin crawl. Reclaiming my space was both therapeutic and traumatic. Each room held memories of invasion and betrayal. I found myself unable to sleep in the master bedroom, the same room Rebecca had commandeered during her occupation. For weeks, I used the guest room instead, still feeling like a visitor in my own home. Have you considered redecorating? Stephanie suggested during one of our lunch breaks. My work performance had improved dramatically since the resolution of my housing crisis, and my boss had expressed relief at having the old Amber back. Sometimes, a fresh coat of paint can help erase bad memories. I took her advice, throwing myself into a renovation project. I repainted every wall, replaced the furniture that had been damaged, and rearranged the floor plan to create an entirely new space. The physical transformation mirrored my internal one, rebuilding, restructuring, creating something stronger from the wreckage. The most unexpected development in my recovery was my growing friendship with Cameron. What had begun as a professional relationship evolved into something deeper. He understood trauma and betrayal in ways my other friends couldn't, having documented similar stories throughout his career. Healing isn't linear, he reminded me one evening as we shared takeout on my newly furnished terrace. Some days will be harder than others. He was right. There were mornings when I woke feeling strong and forward-focused, and others when grief ambushed me without warning. The loss of my family, or rather the illusion of what I thought my family was, hit me in waves. Holidays were particularly difficult, the empty spaces at my table a stark reminder of what had been lost. Kyle became another pillar in my support system, our neighborly relationship deepening into genuine friendship. He introduced me to his circle of friends, generous souls who welcomed me without question, creating a buffer against loneliness. 6 months after the exposure, I received an unexpected letter from Rebecca. She was living in Chicago, she wrote, having decided to make a fresh start far from the wreckage of our family. She was working as an administrative assistant and taking night classes in accounting. I don't expect forgiveness, her letter concluded, but I want you to know that I understand now what I couldn't see then, how hard you worked for everything you achieved, and how wrong we all were to try to take it from you. I'm trying to build my own life now, the way you did, one step at a time, through my own efforts. I read the letter several times, unsure how to respond or whether to respond at all. Eventually, I sent a short note acknowledging her message and wishing her well in her studies. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was a step away from anger. My parents made repeated attempts to contact me, their initial demands for loyalty transforming into pleas for reconciliation as their legal troubles mounted. I maintained my distance, their calls going to voicemail, their letters remaining unopened. Perhaps someday I would be ready to hear them out, but that day seemed very far away. The experience changed me in fundamental ways. I developed a keen awareness of manipulation tactics and boundaries that I had previously lacked. I became more selective about who I allowed into my life, but more generous with those who earned my trust. One of my most healing actions was establishing the Wilson Foundation for Financial Independence, a nonprofit organization providing education and resources to help women secure their financial futures. Using a portion of my investment income, I funded workshops on home buying, investment strategies, and protection against financial exploitation. Your worst experience has become someone else's lifeline, Cameron observed after attending one of the foundation's seminars. That's true resilience. As the 1-year anniversary of the exposure approached, I hosted a dinner in my penthouse, not the original space that had been violated, but the renewed haven I had created from its shell. Around my table sat the people who had helped me rebuild: Stephanie from work, Kyle and his partner, and Cameron, whose hand occasionally found mine under the table. Looking at their faces, my chosen family, I felt something I had thought was lost forever: belonging. The journey from victim to survivor had been brutal, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and surrounded by people who valued me for myself, not what I could give them. That night, after my guests had departed and Cameron lingered to help with dishes, I stepped onto my terrace alone for a moment, gazing at the city lights that had once represented my greatest achievement. Now I understood that the real achievement wasn't the property itself, but the resilience that had allowed me to defend it and myself. Some families are formed by blood, others by choice. The latter, I had discovered, can be just as strong, perhaps stronger for being freely given rather than automatically assumed. In losing what I thought was irreplaceable, I had found something far more valuable: the freedom to define family on my own terms, and the courage to demand the respect I deserved. As Cameron joined me on the terrace, his presence warm and solid beside me, I realized that sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the strength to stand alone, until we find the people worthy of standing with us. What would you do if your family betrayed you for financial gain? Have you ever had to rebuild trust after a major betrayal? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share to help others who might be facing similar battles. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the one we're born into. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you the strength to stand firm in your own worth, no matter what challenges you face.